Soldiers ate rats to survive. Then things got worse. World War I. In World War I, British soldiers didn't just fight Germans. They fought mud, hunger, disease, and rats as big as cats. And when the food ran out, survival meant the unthinkable, eating the same rats that fed on their dead comrades. So why did they do it? And what came next was darker than anyone could imagine. The enemy inside the trenches. It was 1914 to 1918, the Great War, a battlefield that dragged nations into darkness. The British, the French, and later the Americans were locked in a deadlock with Germany. The Western Front wasn't just a line on a map. It was a graveyard carved into the earth. From the North Sea to Switzerland, endless trenches choked with mud, blood, and men living in conditions no human body was meant to endure. Death filled the trenches, but something else claimed them. Rats, monstrous and unafraid, feeding on the war itself. The rat invasion. The trenches weren't just graves for men, they crawled with something else. Rats. Not the alley kind, but bloated monsters, fat from feeding on the unburied dead. Soldiers swore some were the size of cats. Imagine trying to sleep, feeling claws scrape your chest, or opening your eyes to see them staring back in the dark. They chewed through boots, stole bread from hungry hands, and bred so fast that killing them was pointless. One soldier wrote down one, and dozens more appeared. Worst of all, they no longer feared men. They crossed the living as if they were already corpses. But when the food ran out, the rats were not. What choice did starving soldiers have left? The starvation. Food in the trenches was never guaranteed. Supply lines collapsed under shell fire, and when rations did arrive, they were often stale, moldy, or crawling with insects. Meals were stale biscuits and thin soup. Many starved for days, trading cigarettes just to taste bread. In winter, the hunger was unbearable. Bitter winds froze their bones, and empty stomachs twisted in pain. One veteran wrote that hunger was worse than the cold, worse than the fear of shells, because it never left. It gnawed at you from the inside, hour after hour. And as the nights dragged on, some soldiers began to notice that the only thing in abundance down there wasn't rations at all. It was the rats. So what do you eat when your belly screams, and the only meat left is crawling at your feet? The first bite. Word spread quickly through the trenches. Men were roasting rats over candle flames. At first, it was desperation. Hunger strips away pride, and meat was meat, no matter how foul it tasted. Some even forced a laugh, calling it trench rabbit, pretending it was a joke. But humor in the trenches was often just a mask. Behind every bitter joke was the sting of humiliation, the shame of a soldier reduced to hunting vermin. Still, hunger doesn't care about pride. Men bit down, swallowed, and told themselves they'd survived another day. The first chew was the hardest, the fur, the grease, the bitter taste of survival. Yet the moment hunger dulled, guilt crept in. They weren't just eating to live. They were crossing a line. And in those dark trenches, men began whispering that eating rats didn't just keep the body alive, it awakened something else, something far more dangerous. The feast that poisoned the trenches. The rats were never clean animals. They were plagued on four legs. Their fur crawled with lice, their bellies carried fleas, and in their veins lived diseases no man wanted. Trench fever, typhus, and even the sicknesses that spread from rotting flesh. But hunger has a way of silencing reason. Some soldiers still roasted them over flickering candle flames. Every bite was a gamble, a momentary relief from starvation, at the risk of vomiting, fever, or death. One survivor wrote that after eating rat meat, a soldier would shiver uncontrollably by morning, sweat pouring as though the trenches themselves were boiling inside him. Yet still men kept eating, because when your stomach claws at you, fear of sickness feels far away. But the rats weren't finished with the soldiers. Soon, they stopped being just food. The psychological war. Rats didn't wear uniforms, they weren't British, and they weren't German, they belonged to no side, only to death. One German letter spoke of rats chewing the faces of the dead. A British diary described them swarming dugouts, bold enough to snatch food from a soldier's hand. The scratching never stopped. Men said they felt more hunted by rats than by enemy snipers. For every rat you killed, dozens more poured from the shadows. It was like fighting an enemy that could never die. And that thought alone broke men faster than bullets. But the nightmare deepened, because soon the rats stopped waiting for the dead and turned on the living. The ultimate horror. Exhaustion was the soldiers' only escape, but even in sleep the war found them. Men wrote of waking to the sound of gnawing, only to realize it was their own body being chewed. Rats didn't wait for the dead anymore. They went for the living, drawn to the warmth of open wounds, the salt of sweat, and the helplessness of sleep. Imagine fighting all day, collapsing in mud, and then through the haze of a half-dream, you feel claws scrape across your face, teeth tearing at your skin. For some soldiers, that was worse than German bullets. The battlefield you could fight. The rats you could only endure. But this wasn't just a story of survival against vermin. It was a mirror of what men themselves became in the dark, the humanity lost. At first it was survival, but war doesn't just starve the body, it rots the soul. Soon men weren't just eating rats, they were hunting them for sport. Bayonets stabbing into shadows, boots crushing skulls. After echoed in the dark as vermin roasted on open flames, their fat spitting into the mud like fire from hell. The line between man and beast collapsed. Hunger twisted into cruelty, and shame turned into silence. Letters home spoke of honor and duty, never of gnawing on vermin flesh, never of the blood-stained jokes whispered in the night. In the trenches it became a ritual no one dared admit, men reduced to predators, feasting on the filth they once feared. And when the guns fell silent, the rats stayed behind, but the men carried the darkness home. The truth revealed. Decades later, when the silence of war finally cracked, the truth slipped out. Veterans confessed what they once swore they'd never say. When hunger hollowed them to the bone, rats became food. Not a choice, not courage, just desperation. In the frozen trenches of France and Belgium, survival meant surrendering humanity itself. These men weren't only fighting Germans, they fought disease, starvation, and the endless scratching in the dark that never seemed to end. This is the side of war that history books bury, the side where survival was uglier than death itself.